The air in the funeral home was thick, heavy with the scent of lilies and the lingering bitterness of regret. I had never felt more hollow, more untethered from the world, than I did standing in the polished oak-paneled hall, my hands trembling as they clutched the velvet-lined box of my husband's ashes. He was gone. And yet, the moment that should have been suffused with grief was swiftly poisoned by his father's words. "Now that he's gone," my father-in-law said, his voice brittle but deliberate, "the property, it reverts to blood family. You understand, don't you?" The words landed like a cold, steel blade across my chest. I blinked, certain I had misheard him, though the way he didn't flinch, didn't waver, confirmed every horrible syllable. I don't understand," I stammered, my voice almost swallowed by the echoing silence of the room. "You're not his blood," he said simply, with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "The house, the land, everything, belongs to the family." Everything shattered in that instant. I felt my knees weaken, and I gripped the edge of a polished chair to steady myself. I could hear my own heartbeat, uneven and frantic, as if it were trying to warn me before I fell into the abyss. Later, back at the house I had shared with him for 10 years, the reality of his absence hit me harder than any stranger's words could. I wandered through the rooms, touching surfaces he had touched, inhaling scents that lingered only because his memory refused to fade. Everything smelled like him, yet now it felt foreign, as if the house itself had been waiting for someone else to claim it. I sat at the kitchen table, clutching his mug, a simple piece of ceramic with a tiny chip that I had ignored for years. And then my eyes fell on a letter, half hidden under the placemat. I didn't remember seeing it before. It wasn't addressed to me. It was typed, formal, and yet unbearably intimate. "To my dearest William," it began, "I don't know how to say this without causing irreparable harm. I've tried to tell you, I've tried to protect us both, but the truth must come out." My hands shook as I read on, disbelief gnawing at every nerve. It detailed a life I hadn't known, a life he had carefully hidden. Another woman, another family, children, names, dates, places, all meticulously documented. And in every line, the stark realization dawned that the man I had loved, the man whose ashes now sat coldly on my mantle, had lived a parallel life, one that had never intersected with mine. I felt nausea curl in my stomach, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was layered, far beyond the casual infidelity I had feared in some dark corner of my mind. This was deception on an industrial scale, a life built entirely in secret while I had been living, loving, believing. When I confronted his father later that evening, I tried to keep my voice steady, though every syllable trembled with raw, unfiltered emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" He sighed, folding his hands as though he were settling into a long, inevitable confession of guilt. We didn't know you would find out this way. Your husband was very private. He made choices we didn't approve of, but we never thought it would reach this point." "You didn't know? Or you just didn't want to know?" I snapped, my chest tight with betrayal and anger. "You left me, to be his widow and his secret. And now you're telling me this property, this life we built together, isn't mine." His silence was a wound sharper than any knife. The room seemed to constrict around me, the walls pressing in as my own thoughts became a storm of disbelief, grief, and rage. I had been robbed, not just of a husband, but of every memory, every shared moment that had felt sacred. He had crafted a world for himself outside of mine, and the man I mourned was as much a stranger as the stranger he left behind. The next days blurred. I contacted lawyers, tried to untangle legalities, but the weight of emotional devastation outstripped any practical concern. Friends came, some offering comfort, others carefully avoiding the subject, their eyes full of pity and quiet judgment. Even their presence felt like intrusion into a wound that had barely started to scab over. It wasn't until I visited his study that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A hidden drawer, masked beneath the veneer of the antique desk, revealed photographs I couldn't bring myself to look at fully. Smiling children, holidays, birthdays, a life he had nurtured entirely separate from mine. I understood, in a visceral, gut-churning way, why he had hidden it. To acknowledge it would have been to betray me, yes, but also to betray himself. And then, a note slipped between the photos. His handwriting, small and deliberate. I loved you, in my way. I thought it was enough. I was wrong. I collapsed into the chair, my chest heaving, tears falling freely now, but no sound coming out. The shock, the grief, the rage, they were all there, tangled into something raw and unrecognizable. I had loved him fully, with everything I had, and he had loved me partially, selectively, with secrets stacked between us like invisible walls. Weeks later, the legal battle began. His father's insistence on blood family ownership clashed with the evidence of my decade of life entwined with his. Documents, witnesses, shared responsibilities, all of it painted a picture I had lived but they had ignored. And amid it all, the memory of him, the man I had believed I knew, haunted me, a ghost that could never be reconciled with the truth. In the quiet moments, late at night when the house felt impossibly large and empty, I replayed every conversation, every touch, every laugh. And I realized that betrayal is never one-dimensional. It is a slow erosion of trust, a fracture in perception that widens until reality is unrecognizable. I would survive this, I told myself. I would fight for what was mine. But the love I had carried, the faith I had placed in him, the trust that had made me vulnerable, those were gone. They were scattered among the ashes of a life that had never truly been shared. And still, beneath the anger and despair, beneath the shock and the legal battles, there was a strange, lingering understanding. He had been human, flawed, desperate, and profoundly deceitful. And I, too, was human, betrayed, yes, but alive, and slowly, painfully reclaiming the life he had tried to erase. Because even in betrayal, there is a brutal clarity. The truth, no matter how devastating, cannot be hidden forever. And sometimes, survival is the only revenge that matters.